Um, yeah, so I attempted to go for a permanent position, but about 3 months into it, I decided that that wasn't really for me. And so I decided that I needed a new portfolio website. And so I built this, which is just a really simple one-page site. With an admin interface, which is that, so it's just really easy to update. So the things, it is quite important for me to partly have something that's really easy and simple to look at. So I wanted a one-page layout. I wanted an admin interface so I can keep it up to date, because otherwise I just don't, which is not great. And also because I was quite pressed for time, I wanted to be able to add functionality to it later on. So I was also looking for something that would make it simple to do that. And as mentioned before, I wanted it to be quick to build. Before I actually started development, I wasn't quite sure as to exactly what I wanted to do. So I wanted to go ahead and design things first, just to clarify the exact specifications for the project. I don't generally do design, so I went for a kind of straight into CSS build to establish the look of the site. And then once I had the design, then I had to make a call on how I was going to build it. There was the obvious option of Wordpress, but I wasn't really sure whether I actually wanted to go down that route. There was Squarespace, but given that I'm a developer, I felt it was quite important for me to actually build a site myself. There's a PHP framework called Laravel, which somebody suggested, but then at the end of the day, I thought Meteor would be really the best. The reason why I chose Meteor was because I wanted to have quite a bit of control and flexibility over the build itself, which I felt I wasn't going to be able to get with WordPress, or definitely not with Squarespace. I don't really like PHP that much. I started working with Node.js recently, and I think it's just much more interesting, much nicer to use as a backend development. I looked into Meteor in about February, and it was just kind of a really brief thing. So I was quite interested in finding out more about it, and so I was curious. And then also my flatmate Maya suggested that it was thing to go with. Given that I didn't know much about Meteor, there was the obvious question of how I'd go about learning it. And recently, I found that one of the best ways to learn new technology is to do tutorials, despite the fact that I really don't like doing tutorials. Ideally, I'd prefer to know everything by heart straight away, but unfortunately, that's not the case. So I find it really a kind of process of research and then tutorial and then building your own project and then doing more research and using Stack Overflow is really the best way for me personally. I also went through the tutorial in this book, which I found really helpful. I think it's a really great introduction to Meteor in general. So in terms of the actual build process, the website is really quite simple. So I don't feel that there is anything really that complicated about it. Yeah, I mean, I use Bootstrap and sass for layout and styling. I have kind of separate templates for each of the sections here, which are obviously quite kind of small. But so each of these, so this portfolio bit is one template, that's another one. Footer is a separate one, obviously. Obviously used iron router. So in terms of the way the templates are, I have one kind of application template which contains the header and the footer, and then all the other bits of content are rendered into it. And then each of the project details are rendered into the portfolio template, basically. I have two obvious collections, so one's portfolio, one's the about section. I just kept a really, obviously very convenient folder structure, again, really quite typical Meteor. For the admin interface, I just used the Google login because I just found that really the easiest and simplest to implement. So basically, it's just obviously using my Google login, and then I just check for whether the actual login, so whether the email is my email, so that ensures that I'm the only one who's able to edit it with a Google login. And for the form send, it's again just using Google services. Again, just like the previous speaker said, I found it extremely easy and convenient to deploy, so it was just using Meteor app, which just basically put it up straight away. In the process of building the site, I also ended up pre-installing the whole of my server as well. So I put Nginx on it, which I really love. And again, it's something that is really, really great to use with Meteor. So the bits I like the most about I really like that in Meteor there isn't any, so there are no includes. You just kind of write all of your code, and you don't really need to worry about what goes where. Everything is just automatically compiled in. Obviously, the hot code push is really great. It's just, again, it's partly really easy to test. It's just really nice that everything's straight away there. For me, because I was working on both the front end and the back end at the same time, I found it a really lovely experience that everything is kind of part of the same project, rather than, I guess when people are working as part of a larger team, it's quite nice to have back-end developers and front-end developers do kind of their own thing and then work together. But for me, because it was a really small project, it felt really, really integrated, that I could work at the back end and at the front end at the same time, using the same language, using the same kind of structure. So again, that's something I really loved about Meteor. And then obviously just the number of packages available out there was really great. So for example, the Google login was just so easy to implement. There were some things that I didn't quite know how to do, so I found it a little bit more difficult to partly get my head around, partly I'm not entirely sure that my implementation was that great. So I used sass, but I didn't quite work out, well, I did some research into how best to integrate kind of sass compiling with Meteor, but then eventually I just set up a kind of separate Compass project and just had Compass watch sass and output the style sheet into the project folder rather than any other way. So if anybody's got a kind of better suggestion as to how to do that, I'd love to hear that. Another thing that I had trouble with, which is kind of to do with the templating, is basically that when there isn't project here, then so basically I had to kind of create an empty template and an empty project template, so that when there isn't a project here, there's nothing rendered there, if that makes sense, which felt a little bit hacky to me, and I'm not quite sure whether there's a better way of doing that. Also, just when I deployed, there were a few occasions when I deployed when it felt like that there was perhaps some kind of a caching going on with MongoDB, and it wasn't actually putting up the latest content. So again, I'm not quite sure what was going on there, and I'd love to learn more about that. And another thing which I plainly just hadn't quite had the time for is implementing transitions between different sections. And basically, while the site is up and it's viewable, obviously there are a few more things that I would like to add to it. Partly that currently the projects are just in a kind of random order, so obviously it's something to implement. I'd like to add some more images for each of the projects, and I'd like to add blogging functionalities, so that's probably coming in the new year. And that's basically it.